This week on Houston Newsmakers, one word: wow. A surprising victory by Donald Trump to defeat Hillary Clinton in the race for president. It was an impressive electoral win for Trump, even as Mrs. Clinton won the popular vote and in Harris and Fort Bend County won by substantial margins. Her winning margin also affected local races down ballot and is changing the political landscape locally and nationally in ways that are unknown. Our experts will break it down this morning. And Sugar Land on the verge of increasing its population by a third, incorporating 2 existing communities in a final vote next week. What does it mean for the current and new residents, and what else is in store for one of Houston area's fastest growing cities? We'll ask Sugar Land Mayor Joe Zimmerman on this special edition of Houston Newsmakers.
From KPRC Channel 2, this is Houston Newsmakers with Cambrell Marshall.
Good morning. Welcome to Houston Newsmakers, where the main topic is the election of Donald Trump as the 45th president of the United States. To say that many did not see this coming would be an understatement. Almost all of the polls showed Trump losing prior to Election Day, but it was a support of mostly rural and mostly white voters that boosted Trump to victory. Latino and black voters, while voting substantially for Hillary Clinton, did not provide enough support to offset the votes that resulted in upsets in many states that had previously been Democrat. Let's discuss. Gary Pollin is the editor of Texas Review, Texas Conservative Review, and former chair of the Harris County Republican Party. Dallas Jones is a political analyst, and he has also run campaigns, though not in this cycle. And Jay Iyer is assistant professor in the Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs at Texas Southern University. Almost a week has passed since the election. So has it sunk in, and what do you think is going to be going forward from this?
Well, I think it was a testament, I think, to Trump's hard work, bringing out blue-collar voters. I would call them old Reagan Democrats, who turned out in record numbers. He also, by the way, got a record number, exceeded Romney with minority voters, which is kind of surprising when you think about it, but still, I think, a surprise. Only poll that was consistently telling us Trump was going to win was the Los Angeles Times USC poll that said all along he was going to win. And interesting, I think the Clinton campaign had an inkling it was in trouble because they canceled their victory fireworks 3 days before election night. So I think they might have known it was going to be tough.
What is your thought?
Well, I think it's a testament to where we are in the country at this time, the sentiment of many that feel as though they've been left out over the last 8 years in the Obama era of American politics. And I think mostly rural and mostly white voters felt as though the last 8 years did not reflect them and their families. And I think, you know, Donald Trump was able to really, you know, harness that energy, and that catapulted him into the presidency.
Is there any chance how easy or difficult it's going to be for Mr. Trump to harness what seems to be energy and take in the direction that the country can embrace?
Well, I mean, I think as far as the policy side, I think it's going to take some time to figure out exactly what direction he wants to take. I think that's part of the issue with him, is that there's sort of a lack of direction, specifically in terms of what he wants to do. But in terms of the overall numbers, there's a couple things to think about. One is this was a low turnout election. This was the lowest number of total voters since 2000, smaller than 4, 8, or 12. And then Hillary Clinton is going to end up with close to 1 million more votes. She won the popular vote. 6 of the last 7 elections, the Democratic candidate has won the popular vote. This was really an isolated six states really caused this change, right? And so what you had is the industrial Midwest shifted in large part because of a strong turnout among non-college educated Anglo males that voted disproportionately for her.
And clearly his campaign was unlike any we've seen in quite some time. Uncharacteristic and adversarial tone has sparked post-election reaction like we've rarely seen as well. Protests in cities across America, and what seemed like spontaneous acts spread to many cities as people vented their frustrations about the election, and if nothing else, it's a visible illustration about the challenge of getting everybody to come together. Would you say?
And I want to give Secretary Clinton credit, because I think she gave a very fine concession speech and talked about bringing the country together. And I think that Donald Trump now needs to go from the campaigner and at some point agitator as a campaigner to a statesman. Can he make that transition? So I think that the American people all believe that they have a stake in this presidency.
And that is going to
have a voice. And this is a challenge for him because Donald is, of course, used to be in the flamboyant reality TV star, and this is an entirely different role. And that'll be the interesting thing to say, because if you continue with the rhetoric that I think causes concern among some voters, that's going to make it difficult to have the country together. So I think we need to see him do the pivot. We kept talking about, you remember we talked about the pivot going back during the primaries. Well, he'll pivot after he gets the nomination. Well, that didn't really happen. Well, will he pivot after he gets elected? We will see.
Here's an example of some of the angst that some people are feeling. Monica Rohr is a Houston Chronicle writer. She's an investigative journalist, and she wrote a piece last week that focused on how to talk to her children about the election. And some of this sums up the way that many people feel, especially the immigrants and non-white. She writes, "I'm a Latina immigrant. My husband and daughters are black. He and I are both journalists. And Donald Trump, the man who wrangled his way to the presidency by calling Mexicans rapists, by denigrating the contributions of immigrants and refugees, by vowing to bring back the discriminatory practice of stop and frisk by referring to women in the basest of terms and bragging about groping them without consent, is President-elect of the United States. What's more, millions of my fellow citizens voted to put him there." That kind of sentiment is out there, is it not, Dallas?
That's correct. And I think the #1 priority of this administration going in is to heal this country. There are protests going on in major American cities across the country. The peaceful transition of power that we value is not what's being reflected to the rest of the world. There is a concern, a grave concern across our allies, across this world. And so he has to put people at ease that my campaign rhetoric is just rhetoric, and that I'm going to govern with the interests of everyone else that believed in the promise of this country.
Jay, yeah, I think we've seen many times before when presidential candidates or any kind of candidate, once they run, they know they have to govern now. In this case, you have the entire government. You have both houses of Congress. So that, in some cases, presents a challenge, but it also presents a pretty good opportunity for the Republican Party, does it not?
Well, it does. And I think from a governance perspective, they have the ability to do essentially what it is they want to do in putting forth their agenda. So as it relates to reforms on health care, as it relates to whatever changes he wants to make related to immigration, related to climate change legislation or regulatory reform, tax reform, all of that he can implement. The challenge, I think, is that Donald Trump, the president-elect, tends to speak in sort of broad brushes. And I think when you get sort of drilling down to the detail is where it's historically been, I think, been an issue. We had talked about this before related to his lack of specificity on policies. So I think some of the things that will reassure people will be who he surrounds himself with, the role of the vice president, who is a well-respected from a governance perspective, and how he is able to reach out. Because as Dallas pointed out, the rhetoric leading up to this, there's never been a pivot, as Gary said, and that's what concerns people, because he's essentially been rewarded to some extent for not moderating his tone. Whether the substance changes is one thing, but the tone hasn't changed.
We're going to keep it here and continue to talk about this process, the elections locally, and they were very much impacted as well locally because of what was going on at the top of the ticket. Shape up in Harris County and what it means for millions of Houstonians. That's next when Houston Newsmakers continues.